In the age when empires were carved from blood and fire, one man sought to rule not only the land, but eternity itself. Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of China, had conquered the East, unified warring kingdoms, and built walls to hold back the chaos of the world. Yet power breeds obsession, and his eyes turned west, to the lands beyond the sands, where legends spoke of creatures that breathed fire and guarded the secret of immortality. From the edge of the Great Wall, his armies marched into the unknown, following whispers of a storm born in the far west. A storm of scales, wings, and flame. History remembers him as a tyrant, but in the shadows of forgotten chronicles, another tale remains. Of the day the first emperor faced the dragons of the western sky. The wars had ended. The kingdoms of China, once torn apart by centuries of blood and ambition, now bent beneath one rule, that of Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor. His banners rose across mountains and rivers. His voice carried from the Great Wall to the southern seas. For the first time in history, all under heaven was one. But victory brought him no peace. The empire could be eternal, yet the man who built it could not. Qin Shi Huang feared what every emperor feared, that death would undo what conquest had made. In the silence of his palaces, he dreamed of a world where he would never fall, where the empire would not outlive the emperor. He commanded the mystic Shu Fu to cross the eastern seas and seek the elixir of life. The expedition vanished beyond the horizon, leaving behind nothing but whispers. Then came a rumor from the western frontiers, faint at first, carried by merchants and wanderers who crossed the deserts of the Taklamakan. They spoke of a land where the sun burned gold and the mountains smoked with fire. In that distant realm, it was said, lived creatures of ancient power, dragons born of flame, guardians of a gem known as the Long Dan, the dragon's core. A single shard of it, they said, could make a man live forever. The emperor listened. Dragons had long been the symbol of his own divine rule, creatures of heaven and earth intertwined. If the western beasts truly possessed a jewel of eternity, it was not just a prize, it was destiny. To claim it would be to claim the right to defy heaven itself. He ordered his generals to march west, beyond the edge of every known map. Soldiers, scholars, and seers were sent into the great deserts, where the winds carved ruins older than memory. They carried with them banners of black and gold, engraved with the symbol of the dragon, the emperor's own sigil, as if to challenge those who dared call themselves its kin. And so began the last campaign of Qin Shi Huang, not against kings or rebels, but against myth itself. As his armies vanished into the vast silence of the western sands, the chronicles grew quiet. No historian dared write what happened beyond those dunes. But the old legends say that where the Great Wall ends, the tracks of men turn to ash, and beyond them, the shadows of wings still circle beneath a burning sky. At first, the emperor's western expeditions brought back only silence. The scouts who ventured beyond the deserts of Dunhuang never returned. Caravans sent through the shifting sands of Xinjiang vanished without a trace, swallowed by storms that rose from nowhere. Even the nomads who lived along the empire's edge whispered that the desert itself had come alive, that the earth trembled with wings, and that at night, the dunes glowed faintly as if lit from beneath. Then, the heavens began to change. One night, the court astronomers climbed the terraces of the Imperial Observatory and saw a star blazing where none had been before, a crimson light burning in the western sky. Its tail stretched like fire across the heavens, curling into the shape of a serpent. The chief astronomer fell to his knees and declared, "A dragon rises from the west. Heaven warns the Son of Heaven to prepare." The emperor listened in silence. To him, the stars were the language of destiny, and this omen could not be ignored. He summoned every sorcerer, diviner, and scholar of the realm to Xinjiang. For days, the great hall filled with the murmurs of men who had spent their lives reading signs in bone and flame. Some said it was a message from the gods, a challenge from the powers of the West. Others claimed the light marked the awakening of the dragon itself, the guardian of the forbidden jewel the emperor sought. Qin Shi Huang did not believe in coincidence. He believed in will, his will. If the West sent signs of defiance, he would answer not with fear, but with stone and steel. He commanded his engineers to begin work on a new barrier, a great wall stretching deeper into the western frontier, beyond the mountain passes and through the deadly sands. Officially, it was to hold back the nomads of the north. But those who labored on its foundations whispered another reason, that it was meant to contain something greater, something that did not belong to the world of men. As the wall grew mile by mile across the barren plains, strange things began to happen. The ground shuddered at night, and pillars of light rose briefly in the distance before fading into the stars. Scouts brought back fragments of blackened scales, metallic and warm to the touch, and soldiers reported finding footprints too large for any beast they knew. Rumors spread like wildfire through the camps, of a storm gathering beyond the horizon, of wings vast enough to blot out the moon. The emperor ignored their fear. If the West sends dragons, he said, then the East shall send an empire. And with that, the first emperor prepared for a war the world would never record. A war between the power of men and the fire of gods. Beyond the last outposts of the Great Wall, the world turned to dust and silence. The emperor's Western army, 50,000 strong, marched into the endless sands beneath a sky the color of brass. For days, nothing moved but wind and shadow. Then, on the seventh night, the desert began to breathe. The first sign came as a low hum that rolled across the dunes, too deep to be thunder. The air shimmered, and the sand erupted outward in a storm of fire and ash. From that inferno rose shapes no man had ever seen. Great serpents of metal and flame, their scales glowing gold and black, wings vast enough to darken the stars. They moved like living storms, their roars splitting the air, and with them came riders, pale warriors clad in silver armor that reflected the firelight, mounted on beasts that bled smoke and light. The soldiers of Qin stood frozen, their formation trembling on the edge of collapse. They had faced men, monsters, and rebellion, but never gods. The dragons circled once, then dove, their breath turning sand to glass. Entire ranks vanished in an instant. But the emperor's general, Meng Tian, did not falter. With a voice that cut through the chaos, he commanded the legions into motion. Drums thundered, banners snapped, and the disciplined lines of the east met the fury of the west. The crossbows of Qin unleashed a storm of iron, bolts tipped with mercury and fire, designed by the emperor's own alchemists to pierce even the heavens. The dragons screamed as metal met flame, their blood hissing against the scorched earth. When word reached the emperor that his men faced creatures born of the sky itself, he did not retreat. He ordered the forge masters to create a new weapon, the long Huo Lian Nu, the dragonfire repeating crossbow, forged from a fallen star said to have crashed in the northern plains. Its metal was cold as night and unbreakable by flame. Within days, the weapon was sent to the front, a machine born of earth to challenge the fire of heaven. The next battle was not fought in daylight, but under a blood-red sky that flickered with lightning. As the dragons descended again, the legions of Qin unleashed their new creation. Streams of molten bolts tore through the air, exploding upon impact. The desert lit up as if dawn itself had come too soon. Dragons fell, burning, their screams echoing for miles. But victory came at a cost. The sands ran black with ash and iron, and the survivors spoke of shadows still moving beneath the dunes long after the fire died. When the battle ended, the general sent word back to Xinjiang. "We have seen the face of the West. It breathes fire and wears wings of gold." And in the palace of the first emperor, Qin Shi Huang stood upon the map of his empire, his hand resting on the edge where the parchment ended. Beyond it lay only white space, the unknown. He whispered almost to himself, "Then the gods bleed too." In the weeks after the battle, the desert grew quiet again. Too quiet. The wind no longer howled, and even the stars seemed dimmer, as if the heavens themselves were holding their breath. The emperor's armies fortified their camps, waiting for the next wave. But none came. Only the scorched bodies of fallen dragons lay half buried in the sand, their scales turned to stone, their eyes still glowing faintly with a light that refused to die. Then, one night, a messenger arrived from the frontier. Not a soldier, but a wanderer dressed in robes of black silk, his eyes pale as moonlight. He claimed to be a prophet of the old world, a keeper of memories that predated empires. Brought before Qin Shi Huang, he bowed once and said, "You believe you have conquered the West, but what you face is older than any kingdom, older even than the sky you rule beneath." He spoke of a civilization that once rose beyond the Great Sea, a shining realm that mastered both science and spirit. They called themselves the Atlanteans, and their power was drawn from a force they named the Dragon Soul, a fragment of the living energy of the world itself. But pride consumed them. They sought to bind that power into stone to make it eternal. When the heavens struck them down, their world sank beneath the waves, yet their guardians survived, the dragon-born legions, cursed to wander the earth until the lost fragment was reclaimed. That fragment, the prophet said, was now in the emperor's possession, hidden within the heirloom seal of the realm, the sacred jade that symbolized Qin's divine right to rule. The Ngok Long, the Dragon Jade, was not merely a symbol of empire, it was a vessel of life itself. Its light had drawn the dragons eastward, across deserts and oceans, to reclaim what was once theirs. The emperor's court fell into silence. Some called the man a madman, others a liar. But the jade seal, the emperor's own treasure, had begun to pulse with a faint warmth, as if something inside it was awakening. Qin Shi Huang stared at it for a long time, his reflection trembling upon its surface. For the first time, even he seemed uncertain. What you call heaven's mandate, the prophet whispered, is only half the truth. There is another, the dragon's mandate. One grants dominion over men, the other over life itself. And now they stand at war. The emperor dismissed the prophet, but his words took root in every mind that heard them. The scholars debated whether the Jade Seal's power was truly divine, or something older, something that did not belong to man. That night, storms rose across the empire. Lightning split the skies above Xinjiang, and the earth trembled beneath the Great Wall. In the darkness of his chamber, Qin Shi Huang held the glowing seal in his hands and whispered, "If the dragons come for what is mine, then let them face the will of heaven itself." But far beyond the desert, the clouds were already stirring, and from within them, the dragons answered. The desert was no longer a wasteland. It had become an ocean of flame. The sky burned crimson, and the wind screamed like a living thing. From horizon to horizon, the dunes shifted like waves, each crest glowing with the light of distant fire. There, at the heart of the world's emptiness, the armies of Qin met the dragons of the west for the last time. The emperor himself led them, not from a palace, but from a chariot of jade and gold that shimmered beneath the infernal sky. His armor gleamed black as obsidian, the sigil of the dragon carved into his breastplate. In his hand, he held the Zhan Long Jian, the dragon-slaying sword, forged by the smiths of Mount Tai from the heart of a fallen star. The blade hummed as if alive, thirsting for what was to come. When the dragons descended, the world seemed to break. Their roars cracked the heavens, and the air turned to fire. The earth split open as molten sand poured from the wounds of the desert. The emperor raised his sword high, and his legions, disciplined, unyielding, moved like one vast machine. Drums thundered, and the Great Wall itself seemed to echo their defiance. The dragonfire crossbows unleashed their final barrage, bolts of molten metal streaking across the sky. Some dragons fell, screaming, their bodies crashing into the dunes with the weight of mountains. But for everyone that fell, two more rose. Their wings darkened the sun, their breath turned stone to ash. At the center of the storm, the Dragon King appeared, a colossus of shadow and flame, its scales glimmering with the light of dying stars. It spoke not in words, but in a voice that shook the bones of men. "Return what was stolen, son of earth. The soul you hold is not yours to command." But Qin Shi Huang did not kneel. "Heaven gave me the mandate," he said. "The world bends to my will." And with a cry that tore the air apart, he drove the dragon-slaying sword into the heart of the storm. Light exploded across the desert. The ground convulsed, splitting open in 1,000 fissures as fire and sand consumed the battlefield. The emperor and his army were swallowed whole, their banners vanishing into the earth, their voices lost to the wind. When the dust finally settled, nothing remained. The sea of sand was silent again. Yet beneath its stillness, something lingered. Rows upon rows of soldiers standing motionless beneath the ground, their faces carved in perfect calm. The old legends say they were not built by mortal hands, but transformed. The fallen army of Qin, turned to clay to guard their emperor for eternity. And deep within the buried palace, beside the sleeping emperor, lies the Jade Seal, still pulsing faintly, as if a heart beats within it. Some say that when the seal glows once more, the dragons will return, and the first emperor will rise again. Not as a man, but as the immortal lord he always sought to be.